Welcome to the Vine Podcast. This is Warren, and today we are going to talk about artistic expression, the challenges and the blessings of producing a virtual Christmas pageant during a pandemic, and any other topics that may spring up along the way as part of that conversation. And joining me for this conversation today is a very special guest to the Vine Podcast, the director and producer of the Vine's own virtual Christmas pageant, Jason Martin.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on to promote my new project.
Yes, that's why people go on podcasts, right?
That's right.
To promote a book, an album, speaking tour, or virtual Christmas pageant. So
that's right.
We're
grateful. So we're here. We're going to talk about that, and pretty soon I'll be on the publicity tour. So you're my first stop on the publicity tour.
Well, we're honored. So, well, let's kind of start. Let's start there with the pageant itself. And if you're listening to this, hopefully you've had a chance to watch it. If not, if you plan to watch it, it may make more sense to watch the pageant first before listening to this conversation. Not that, I'm guessing most of our listeners sort of know the Christmas story. So not that anything would be shocking to you or that there would be spoilers in the story about how it ends or anything. But some of it may make sense. I don't know, maybe not. But we watched it as part of our worship service on Sunday, and we thought we'd spend some time talking about that today. So, Jason, just to kind of kick us off with that, can you just kind of share your thoughts overall just about the process of putting this together in this season? Because I think you've talked in some different places and settings about how this is something we talked about last year. And of course, before we knew what 2020 was going to bring, we talked about wanting to do a pageant again this Christmas season. And still wanted to attempt that even with the pandemic. And so this script and this opportunity presented us the chance to do that. So can you just kind of share your overall thoughts on the process, how you kind of experienced it and how you think it went?
As we began to get closer to the time where we would need to start working on this, it was clear that we weren't going to be able to do the kind of Christmas pageant that you and I had talked about possibly doing before, which was going to be a more traditional in-person pageant at the church with everybody on the stage and doing that. That just wasn't going to be responsible. There would be no way really to rehearse and to get that put together. And even if we did, there are enough people that were who would be uncomfortable coming in, even watching something like that that was just going to be challenging to the point of impossible. So I had the idea, well, maybe we could do something over Zoom. I had heard about various professional theater companies who, because they couldn't have their normal live stage shows, were producing online content, a lot of which was over Zoom or remotely, or maybe one person would film one part from their home and then someone else would film another part from their home. And so I knew that was a thing in theater communities. And so I thought maybe we could do that for a Christmas pageant. And I was thinking I would just kind of write a very basic script with different scenes and recruit people to record that in their home, and we'd put it together and it'd be a fun little thing. But then you went online, and I think this is a company that you've used before, Illustrated Ministry, that they had created a pre-packaged virtual Christmas pageant, which included the script and the graphics and kind of a walkthrough of how to do something like this. And you let me know about that, and I said, that is perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. That saves me a ton of time, and probably would do a better job than I certainly could do a better job than I could in putting something like that together. And so once I got that, you bought it and sent it to me. I read through it, looked through the material, and thought, oh yeah, we could totally do this. And so then it was just a matter of kind of just facilitating that, recruiting people who are willing to do that, and then just compiling it and putting it together. And overall, I'd say it went pretty smoothly. I think the biggest thing I was worried about was, I'm pretty tech savvy. I can figure out my way around pretty much any computer program and anything related to technology. I feel like even if I may not master it, I can at least do something adequate. But I know that there are other people who feel a lot more intimidated by something like that and would not feel comfortable doing that. So my biggest concern was, to what degree would people be willing to record themselves? Well, and the other part is, a lot of people don't like seeing themselves on camera. And so when you're doing something live, you don't have to watch yourself do it live, typically.
Right.
Whereas if you're recording it and you're going to be on camera, at some point, presumably, you're going to watch the thing you produced. And so you're going to have to watch yourself on camera. And a lot of people don't like doing that. I don't like doing that. I've had to be on camera for various things in my job and in just videos that I've made or been a part of, and I don't like seeing myself. Actually, you'll notice that I don't appear on camera at all during the Christmas pageant. So, I assure you, that was just a coincidence, though.
Well, I think the other challenge of it is, I think, and I heard Rowan Atkinson, I may have mentioned this before on this space, but Rowan Atkinson, I heard him say at the beginning of the pandemic, kind of that he greatly prefers stage acting as opposed to screen, movie, TV stuff, because he said when you're doing it in front of a camera, there's always that thought of, I can do that a little better, I could do it a little differently. And he said there's always this fear that he has of, like, someone watching it and being like, that's the take that he decided to go with. Like, and I had that same thought preaching to the camera instead of doing it live. Like, I always had the thought at the beginning of, well, I could have done this part a little better or differently. And that thought of somebody's going to watch it and be like, that's the one he decided to go with. So it does present different challenges anytime you're doing it with a camera in a lot of different ways, I think.
Well, I'm sure a lot of our volunteers who were actors in the production had the same thought. Like, oh, why did you use that clip? And frankly, actually, I had my wife help me kind of proofread the thing. So the other night, I asked her if she would sit down and watch it all the way through, just to make sure that there wasn't any kind of glaring problems, that there's some text that's on screen sometimes, so check for misspellings and that kind of thing. And so she watched it through, and she's in a very small part at the end when the women are reciting the Magnificat. She's one of many women who are part of that scene. Mm-hmm. And she kept saying, "Oh, we need to re-record that. That was a bad sweater for me to wear. I shouldn't have worn that. And what is that in the background behind me? We need to clear that up. No, we need to re-record." And I was like, "You're kidding, right?" She's like, "No, I'm serious." But then she eventually relented, because by that point the entire thing was done. And I was like, "No, we can't re-record."
Yeah, the camera just provides all kinds of different challenges. Well, and you mentioned Illustrated Ministry, and for those who remember back to something we did earlier in the pandemic, we did a coloring project of putting together a bunch of different panels that and different people colored one page that we put together as part of this large mural. That was around Easter, I guess. Yep. And
I think you originally wanted to have it done for Easter Sunday.
Yeah, and I think we did it for the Sunday after that, or something. Yeah,
I think it came together the Sunday after that. But yeah, that was really cool. I really liked that project too.
And so that was also from Illustrated Ministry, the same company. And I think the commonality, or the common element between both of these projects that I think has been beneficial from a pandemic social distancing standpoint is that they both provided opportunities for us to work on something collectively, or to work on something on our own, sort of in our own homes, in our own spaces, on our own time, that would come together as this sort of communal effort. And it was a reminder for me, this pageant was a reminder for me that we could probably do well to keep looking for opportunities to do that. And I remember being struck by the ways that the coloring project had an impact on those who were a part of it. And the responses I got from those people that said it was so cool to see, because you couldn't, in a lot of the pieces of that project, you couldn't tell what the finished product was going to be when you were working on your one little piece. And to see that then come together, and to see how your part fit in with the larger picture of what everyone else was doing, I think was really impactful. And I think this may have been the same. Of course, you and I have seen it as we're recording this. Others haven't seen it, so we don't know how others will receive it or respond to it.
Yeah, by the time they're listening to this, they've heard it, or they've seen it. But we don't know exactly what the reception will be.
That's right. Yeah, but I think I can see a similar reaction happening from people, because that was kind of my thought was, as we're recording our one little piece of it, like, how is this going to fit into the larger picture, the larger narrative, and I think that was cool to see. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that, of like the ways in which this helps to foster community and a sense of sort of shared accomplishment in a season where we don't get those opportunities as often, perhaps.
Yeah, I was struck by that as I was editing the video, and as I was putting everything together, is that each scene, for the most part, features a different household, or occasionally two households from our church community. And many times these are households that have not been able to come together at all over the majority of 2020, really since March. And, I had been so used to seeing all these people together in one place that it was striking to see them all in one place in this video, because they haven't been in one place in so long. Mm-hmm. Even though we kind of we've resumed in-person worship for about a month and a half or 2 months now. It's been very limited, very small. There's still a lot of our regular members who aren't coming back, and that's great. That's fine if they need to worship from home. But this video allowed me to see how our church family really still comes together, and it really highlighted, first of all, I think in some ways, the sadness of the 2020, that we have been, apart so much, that we haven't been able to be together as a group, physically be together as a group in some time. But it also kind of showed me the I guess resilience might be a word. We're a pretty small church anyway. And so, if you have a sizable portion of your membership, just not coming on Sunday morning for any reason, that's gonna look small. It's gonna look like, wow, where did everybody go? And I mean, we all understand right now where people are, and it's not a mystery, and it's not a it's not a tragedy or anything that they're not coming. The greater tragedy is more the pandemic in general. But this video kind of reminded me that we are still the same community, or at least we still come together and we still do things together. And I think I mentioned that I asked my wife, Carrie, to screen the video before I kind of before I finished it. And that was what jumped out to her. Was she just said it was really cool to see every family doing their scene, and everyone coming together for this 22-minute video in a way that really we haven't come together since late February, early March. And so that community aspect of it was really impressive. And I think, hopefully if when we're able to move past this time of pandemic, and when we're able to, when people do feel comfortable coming back together as a church and worshiping together on Sunday morning, we'll still have this video as a positive reminder that the church building is not the church. That, as the old saying goes, the church is you, the people. And I think this video kind of helps demonstrate that and embody it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a positive experience and venture and project for sure. And I'm grateful for all the work that you put into it. I think it turned out really well. I'm grateful for the care and thought that all the participants put into it, and I know it had to be a lot of time and effort and energy on your part.
It did. It actually did take a lot of time. The good news is that because I teach at a university and we're in between semesters right now, I had a little bit extra time to do that, and I kind of added it up in terms of the time it took me to work on this. Yeah, there was some time kind of facilitating the early stuff of, providing instructions, emailing materials. We had an online Zoom meeting just with anybody who could attend, and all that took some amount of time. But really, the majority of the time I spent working on it was a couple of Sundays ago. I think the first Sunday in December, I filmed a couple of scenes at the church with some families who weren't able to film it themselves. So we just, recorded at the church. And then other than that, the most time I spent on it was basically Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Monday. So basically Thursday through Monday or Tuesday of last week. Yeah, actually it was through Tuesday. So I guess those 5 or 6 days, I spent a lot of time on it each of those days. Actually Sunday, yeah, was probably less because I was doing some other things. But I was thinking that for like 2 solid weeks I might have to be working on this, and that really wasn't the case. It was really more like 5 or 6 days for a long period of time. And normally I wouldn't be able to do that, but this is the right time of year that I had the time to put into that. And it helped that I was having fun. If you're putting in a lot of time into something, it's easier when it's fun. And this was a lot of fun for me. So much fun to just be working with that and seeing, okay, how can I make this scene, a little bit, pop a little bit more? Is there music that would work to put underneath this scene? Or, how do I want this transition to the next scene to go? Or is there a sound effect that works well here or works there? All that kind of stuff. Those kinds of questions were fun for me to explore and play around with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to come back to some of that, but I wanted to hit part of what you had said earlier too, because I do think it was fun, it was positive, it was all of those things. But you mentioned that it kind of also highlighted the sadness of 2020, which I think is good to remember. And I hadn't necessarily thought of it as watching it, but when you said that, it did make me think that there are going to be people who watch this who have not, for instance, heard Rosemary or Jenny speak as articulately as they do in that video.
That's right.
And there are people who probably haven't heard them speak since March, right? And and at that point they were much less vocal, at least especially when they were present at gatherings and things. And
some of that is the shyness of little kids that
sure, yeah. So it's
a
both.
little bit.
It's both.
Yeah,
it's that they're almost a year older and they're kindergartners now, and they're just much more articulate in and of that, combined with the fact that they typically were just not very, very vocal at the gatherings anyways, and so all of that just probably pops pretty strongly if you haven't seen them since March, and the same way in a very to a different extent with like Regan and Aiden and Zeke and Jasmine and the teens who were a part of it, that you can see maturity and growth and just the difference in them as well compared to, you know, when we were previously meeting. And so that's that on one hand.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point.
Is exciting and it's neat to see, but there is also this sadness of what was missed over the last year, of getting to of the things that you would normally, I think, sort of take for granted and maybe look past, of getting to watch our young people grow together has been missed. And I do hope that, you know, we talk about, we've talked about in this podcast, things that we hope we carry forward. And I do hope there's some of that maybe we don't take for granted as much, and that we try to pay attention to going forward. Because I do think there may be an element of grief and a reminder of the cost of 2020.
Right. And, you know, that's something that certainly is not unique to our church. You know, I know I've heard from people who haven't seen their grandkids since March, and, you know, especially for the younger grandkids, you know, they're growing exponentially and changing and maturing, and, you know, they're going from babies to, you know, little children and kids, and going from little kids to teenagers, and from teenagers into adults. And, you know, for us, for people, you and me, you know, it was a crazy, you know, not great year, but it was just, you know, it was just a few months. You know, a few months go by like nothing for us. But for kids, it's, you know, a huge, almost not a lifetime, but a sizable chunk of their life, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And that is something lost that I hadn't really thought about, but you're absolutely right about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I want to talk about the script itself for a minute, because the script was certainly much more lighthearted than a traditional Christmas pageant would be.
Yes.
And I hope that was received well by everyone. I hope it was not seen as making light of or anything like that. I think it was an attempt at a joyful expression of it, which I enjoyed, and I think is actually very fitting for the season. Like, we need some lightheartedness, right? Let's just do something that's fun and that's having some fun with this story and telling it in a different way. As far as kind of how we perceive some of these things, and I was wondering your perspective just on that, and the thought that I had was, do you think that the forum that we had to do this in, because it was virtual, do you think that kind of presented more of an opportunity for some of that? Like, it seems like maybe if you're doing a traditional pageant like in person, maybe some of that wouldn't be as easy to pull off or to do. I don't know. Like, it seems like the format kind of provides itself for some flexibility there in how you tell the story, and some of the lighthearted elements that we were able to incorporate into it, or that Illustrated Ministry kind of incorporated into it in the script that they wrote for it.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that come to mind around that question. First is the forum, the vehicle that we're using to tell this story definitely played a large role in that. And I'm not just talking about it being video as opposed to live. I'm also talking about the way different families and households more or less were able to take the reign and record it however they wanted to record it. And a lot of households, a lot of scenes, I was not involved in the actual recording of the scenes at all. I wasn't involved in the direction of how to say a particular line or anything like that. People would just record their scenes, they would send the raw footage to me, and then it was my job to edit it and put it together, which is the way I designed it. I explicitly made it clear that that families and households could do that if they chose to do so, and some chose to do so. And so because of that, I would get footage and I would go, man, I really would like to reshoot this. Is it worth kind of contacting that family and saying, hey, could you do this again? Because they probably thought, okay, we did this, we sent it to Jason, it's now done, check that to-do item off of our list. Or even if it was like little stuff, it would be like if I had actually been physically present or at least virtually present during the filming, I definitely would have said, okay, can you say the line in this way? Or, at this part, look up at this particular angle, or, here's how I want you to deliver it, or, put a little pause. I would have done like actual stage directing. But I didn't have the opportunity to, and that was fine. That was by design that I didn't have the opportunity to. And so I had to kind of ask myself, is it worth going back to the family and saying, hey, could you do this again? And there, in fact, there was only one, and I won't say where it is, but there was only one part where I did actually go back and say, hey, could we reshoot this? And they were very good and very happy to reshoot it, and I was really glad that they did. I think it turned out better, but that was one thing I had to work with. The other part, and I think this gets to more the question that you're asking, is that when you're kind of filming in isolation, you don't have other people around you necessarily to say, is that the right approach? Is that the right tone you want to set? So, for instance, Mary is played by my daughter Regan, and the angel Gabriel is played by my son Aiden, and they have a scene together where Gabriel, tells Mary that she's pregnant, going to give birth to the Son of God, and all that kind of stuff. And we recorded that, by ourselves up at the church. Honestly, we were in a bit of a hurry. My daughter, had some other stuff she needed to do that day, and so she didn't have a lot of patience to kind of do a lot of retakes. And so we recorded it, and it was kind of funny. And then we get home, and I'm editing it together, and I'm going, is this a little too irreverent? Is this a little too casual? And that's definitely an instance where I actually was there, and I could have done this, but we were kind of in a hurry, and I wasn't thinking about it. But I really wish I had taken the time, or when I was editing it, I thought, I wish I had taken the time to really direct Regan in how she was portraying Mary. I think she was doing it very funny and very casual, and and she's 15, and she had other things on her mind that day, so she was like, yeah, okay, we'll do this, we'll record it, we'll get out, we'll go move on. She wasn't putting a lot of thought into it, and this is a story that I think has a lot of depth, and that we're probably doing it a disservice if we just kind of record it and move on. And that was, I think, my fault for not kind of shaping that a little bit better. But then as we were editing it, I was like, oh, is this a little too casual? Is this a little too irreverent? This scene in particular. And I don't know, maybe it's because it's my kids and I'm the one kind of editing all this together, but I just thought, that was the one scene where I thought, I don't know that this strikes the right tone. But again, by that point, it was kind of too late. I knew that my daughter would have revolted if I had said, we need to reshoot
do
this.
it all again.
Yeah. Well, in fact, there was one part that a part of the script that we completely forgot to record when we recorded her part that day. And we had to go back and do again. And she was already... she's a trooper, and she kind of went along with it. She had agreed to do this, and so it's not that she was complaining or anything, but I could tell that she was like, okay, all right, we'll go do this one part that we forgot to do. Fine.
Well, but I think the tone fits with the rest of the script in that it kind of is a little bit of a lighthearted, sort of tongue in cheek, but in certain places. but I think, yeah, the Mary scene is the first one that hits you, and so if you're expecting kind of the traditional telling of it, then maybe it stands out a little more if you're not kind of familiar with the way the rest of the script is going to go.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that it's really the first scene where you go, oh, this is that kind
this is going to be
that kind of pageant.
Jenny's part kind of sets the scene for that when she talks about screws in her eyes and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, as part of fears that she has. So you kind of get a little inkling of that, and certainly even with Gabriel's persona that he takes on, but it hits you from the beginning. But I think the thing that, you know, with art, and maybe this can be kind of a transition to sort of how we think about art too, and kind of artistic expression. Because there's always like what art, like the actual representation of it, and then what it's supposed to communicate, like what you feel in that, right? And to me, what that sort of communicated, and the interpretive element of it was, I think it brings out the teenage aspect of Mary very well in a way that is sometimes missed in a lot of our tellings of it, right? Like we want Mary to be this solemn, wise, just kind of very put together,
right,
picture of peace and tranquility.
We want her to be a fully formed, kind of mature adult.
Right, yeah. But she's a teenager who has no idea what's going on and is literally deeply troubled when the angel first speaks to her. And so what would a deeply troubled teenager who doesn't understand this greeting that's coming to her, maybe some of those elements are in that picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the part that we may have missed, though, is I don't get a sense of her deep troubledness in our production, but that's okay. Maybe that's all right.
That's okay. Like I said, I think once you're through with it, it fits with the overall theme of the... Herod didn't use a phone either, so, we can...
Right. Oh, wasn't that great? That part just cracked me up every single time I watched it. Every time he picks up that phone and turns around and says, "Excuse me." Yeah. Zoe kind of laughs in that part, and I just laugh right along with her. It's a perfect part.
Yeah, and I thought, to me, I thought about the kind of the opportunities that the forum provides, particularly even because of our scene that we did, when Isley's favorite line of everything that we did was when she gets to tap on the camera screen and say, "Is this thing on? Am I on mute?" That was her favorite line, and
she played it perfectly too, and her facial expressions. Yeah.
Yeah. Pulls the curtain back on the, like, yes, we're doing this all on Zoom, because our part literally was on Zoom. As you said, we were planning to do that together with the Allens, but because we're in this pandemic time when people are in quarantine at certain times, we needed to be in separate places.
Right.
And so we were literally doing it on Zoom, but it kind of pulled back that curtain, and yeah, this is different. And I think, I don't know, there was just part of me that felt like that script and that way of approaching it just sort of felt more natural in that environment than it might have if you're doing it live. Not that there's not a way to do that if you're doing it live, but I think it fit.
But yeah, to kind of go back to your original question, the one thing that I was worried about in terms of how people would receive this was, would they consider this too irreverent, too casual, too kind of ignorant of the gravity of the story, and too dismissive of the seriousness of the topic? And I could definitely see someone having that approach. I think where I ultimately came down, though, was kind of what you said, that this is a year unlike any other that any of us have really been through, with the pandemic in particular. And not just with the pandemic, but a lot of the things going on in the country that are just very dark. Just a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear running rampant in our culture right now. And I think ultimately I decided, is it a little irreverent? I don't think so, but I think I could see how someone might see it that way. But what it is, and I think that for a time like this is most important. It's joyful, and it's celebratory, and it's optimistic. And I think nowhere captures that more. And this is why I did the last scene, the final scene, the Magnificat, where we have, started by Mary, my daughter who plays Mary, started by her, but then contributed to by a number of different women from our church, reciting the Magnificat, extolling the wonders of the Lord and extolling his power and protection over the lowly. And that to me speaks of the kind of optimism and the kind of joy that we really need at this time. And so is it a little irreverent? Again, I don't think it crosses the line, but I could see how someone would think of it that way. But if ever there was a time to lean on the side of optimism and lean on the side of joy, lean on the side of, God has this under control. And so, I will fear no evil. This is a time to do that.
So I want to talk about kind of shifting gears from the specifics of this pageant kind of to artistic expression in general, because I know that, so I know theater is a passion of yours, and you even you double majored in as an undergrad in theater and youth ministry, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
And I know that's continued to be an interest of yours and a passion of yours. And I think it's something that, one of those things, we've talked about this with several different topics. We probably haven't always fully realized the value of that in spiritual disciplines and realms and worship settings and things like that. Some groups have more than others. But I wonder if you can just kind of maybe speak to that for a minute of how you see artistic expression benefiting us and helping us to develop and grow and mature spiritually. And are there connections there that we don't always kind of fully realize?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think at its heart, and I suspect that other people might disagree with me, but I believe at its heart, art is about emotion, regardless of what it is, whether it's visual art, performing arts, if you're talking about music, movies, television shows, any kind of art is about emotion. It's about evoking a feeling through a story or through an image. It's about evoking an emotion. And our emotions are deeply tied to our spiritual nature. And that's something that I think a lot of times we want to ignore or want to pretend doesn't exist. And so we can get very heady, we can get very academic, which there's a place for that. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm as much as anybody else, like to get into the weeds of scripture and like to kind of parse words and look at the Greek and what does this actually mean and what's the, we almost become somewhat bureaucratic in how we look at the role of God in our lives. And I think art in worship is a counterbalance to that. That's, in my opinion, I don't know if this is, necessarily why it's the case, but this is why I believe, a typical worship service that includes a sermon as well as some worship music, as well as, prayers. I mean, most Christian worship service will include those elements. It'll have music. It will have a sermon of some kind. It will have prayer and scripture reading. And I think all of those elements are elements that bring a different degree of emotion and a different degree of kind of analytical nature to the worship experience. And I think that's a good thing to have. That's a good balance to have. Aside from the music in worship, though, very often unless we intentionally bring it in, there isn't a lot of that artistic expression. And in some churches that I've been to, that even that part, the music, has become very formulaic and has
Right.
become very stagnant and unemotional. And I think that there is a place, as much as there's a place for Bible study, and as much as there's a place for exegesis, and as much as there's a place for, kind of parsing out, what is it that God is trying to tell us, or how is it that we are to live our lives, and to, kind of those more day-to-day practical aspects of religious life. I think there's also a significant place, and I think a lot of it may be untapped, of looking at how can we tap into the more ethereal or kind of spiritual, emotional, more charismatic ways in which our faith can be understood and expressed and grown. And so the arts, I think, provide a wonderful way to do that in lots of different ways. Visual art, I think, is a big one there. That's one that I don't feel as called to myself, but I know a lot of people are. And there's wonderful, incredible artwork throughout history that is built around religiosity or spirituality and expressing oneself and their faith through art, through visual art. I think music is a very obvious one and has been used, forever, since, as long as we can tell. But storytelling, I mean, I think a lot of the stories that are in the Bible, started out as oral storytellings. I think it's fair to say that even going back to the creation story, everything in Genesis, Genesis wasn't written down, and that's the first time anybody had heard those stories. Those had been oral stories that had been told for generations prior to being written down. And so that, in a sense of the day, that was movie making, that was stagecraft of its time. So any kind of artistic expression can be used in that way. So movies, stage. In a lot of churches, you have puppet ministries. Podcasts. There are a lot of church-related and religious podcasts. Not ours, but there are plenty more than ours that do this kind of thing. And sometimes that can get a little heady. I know that on our podcast, sometimes we get fairly academic, but hopefully there is an emotional expression that comes across right now in what we say and in how and the topics that we're pursuing. And I think that art, to whatever degree it is untapped, I think that there is always an artistic way to worship God and to express one's spiritual nature. And I think it's just as legitimate as things like Bible study and looking at, God's will in your life and how does God want you to live your life. I think that's important, but I think artistic expression and finding ways to have God embody you in a way that is difficult to describe and is difficult to understand, but is very real and very powerful and very felt. I think all of that is just as legitimate.
Yeah, and what I was thinking, when you talked about the creation account, like what is the creation account but God creating art, right? I mean, you could certainly see it that way. I think, and you can go forward through all. I mean, even in the birth story of Jesus, Mary sings a song, like that's her expression, that's her response to it after her visit with Elizabeth is the Magnificat, which you referenced earlier. And so it's a creative, artistic expression. And I think that the benefit is it helps create experiences and moments. And I think about that. I often think about that moment with Peter where he has the vision of the animals coming down, and God could have just told him the message that he wanted Peter to get across, But God basically like puts on this play, sort of. He does this artistic rendering expression of it to make the point. And it hits with Peter differently than it probably would have if God had just come and told him, hey, everything's clean now, you're good. It had a deeper, more felt, more emotional impact, I would have to think.
Well, look at the entire book of Revelation. What John is describing in that book is something that he could have written out pretty directly. And frankly, if he had written it out more directly, then people probably wouldn't have been so obsessed with that book over the centuries. But no, he uses some pretty vivid imagery, and he uses some pretty vivid language to, even beginning before he starts talking about the visions, when he's talking about the different, the different letters to the various churches in Asia, those churches and what he's saying to them is very vivid, and he's using incredible imagery even through that. And then when he gets into the bulk of the book of Revelation with such dramatic and violent and confusing imagery, that apocalyptic imagery, just throughout, that's a form of storytelling and art that has been drawn, that people have drawn upon for artistic endeavors, both music and visual art for ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's much that 2020 has taught us, and I won't spend much time on this today, but because I'm going to come back to it in another podcast or sermon or something. But I think it has. What I hope it will do for me is help to move a lot of things from the kind of conceptual headspace to practicality and practical usage. Because I think there are several things just about life in church that I've kind of always believed conceptually, but struggled to put into practice. That 2020 has forced in some ways and kind of helped, I think, to see the relevance of. And I think artistic expression and creativity and things like that in worship experiences is certainly part of that, because the YouTube worship services provided opportunities for some of that in a more natural way. And just the switch in venue caused me and us collectively to think outside of kind of our normal frame of reference and thought for what a worship service is. And so it provided me opportunities to do things in sermons like use a green screen and preach from different locations at certain times when the sermon kind of called for that, and to bring in different elements from the sermon, and to have Maxine paint over one of our worship sets, and to bring in different videos and things like that it just it provided maybe more natural outlet for some of that I hope we continue. And I think actually, when we made the switch back to in person, we sort of sacrificed some of that creativity for a season, because now our emphasis has been on, okay, how do we do this in person and online? What are the logistics that we have to get right? So there's a lot that we've just kind of trying to figure out on that end of it. And in addition to, we've got people from week to week who have to quarantine or we have to social distance and some of that. But I hope going forward, it's going to be a goal of mine to keep some of that creativity and openness to form and things like that. And I think this pageant is sort of evidence of that, because I know even for me, on one hand, you think about incorporating a pageant into a worship service. It's well, does that really fit? That doesn't fit the order of worship that we have typically, right?
Yeah.
But in 2020, it felt much less disruptive, I think, to me. We've been doing different stuff all year.
Yeah.
And so
we've had bigger disruptions than this.
Right. In some ways, I think 2020 has helped to break some of that, and has helped to kind of open our minds up, or at least for me personally, to just kind of what we've been holding on to, what we've been believing, what I've been believing conceptually but not always putting into practice. What are some things that we've just kind of that I've been holding on to that maybe could take some reimagining and even as we were talking about artistic expression, I was thinking about, there are very few like Wednesday night classes that I just remember the specifics of. There are a few that stand out, but one of them that stands out is the one that Marcia did, and I think you were there, Jason, where she brought all those cards.
Oh yeah,
like that had art.
Those postcards with artwork on it.
Postcards with art from different kind of times and periods, and
I remember that.
And had us do several things with those cards, and was very different. Wasn't like anything I had experienced in a Bible class before. But I remember like the things that we talked about in there, and to your point about emotions, like the way that some of those art and those artistic expressions made me feel, and the response that they brought, and the ways that she connected that to things, and I thought was very well done. And those things do stand out when we experience them, and they have an impact. All right. Well, we've probably talked around that enough for today. Well, I am appreciative of your work and effort putting this together. I hope it's received well and enjoyed by others. And I certainly enjoyed watching it, and think that others will as well. So
thanks.
It was a good experience.
Well, and like I've said a few times, I don't know if anybody will enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed making it, but I hope that it's at least I hope people enjoy watching it, but it was a really great and rewarding experience for me personally.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going to close us in prayer for today, and then we'll be done for our time. Our Father in heaven, thank you for creating us as creative beings. Help us to remember that when we are creative, we are reflecting your image, that we are expressing a godlike quality about us. Help us to see the value in our own creativity and the creativity of those around us. Help us in this Christmas season, God, to seek experiences with you, experiences with our families, experiences with those around us in ways that may be possible and safe in this strange time. Experiences that grow us, that stretch us, that deepen our love and our sense of community and our sense of appreciation for Jesus and what his birth represents in our lives and in our families and our communities and for our world. Thank you, God, for the good news of Christ that brings joy for all the people. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Feel the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor does he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail. With peace on earth, goodwill to peace on earth, goodwill to peace of God has come. Glory to God, forever amen. Peace of God has come. Peace on earth, goodwill to peace of God has come. Glory to God, forever amen. Peace of God has come. Peace on earth, goodwill to peace of God has come.